Let me welcome you to this presentation of Mango Tree Dialogues. And it is good from time to time that we remind ourselves of why we're here. As you know, those of you who have listened, and I'm grateful to the number of people who have been subscribing. Yeah, we're young and growing, and that's how it is. We give God thanks for his blessings, however small. But we are about public, social, and political commentary and on the issues of the day. And we do so as we sit under the mango tree. From time to time, I have guests and we dialogue about the issues of the day. And sometimes I just do presentations on how I view things and what has been happening in the world, especially in the diaspora, the Jamaican diaspora in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, where they are the largest populations of Jamaicans abroad. And certainly we do on issues relating international issues and certainly issues relating to what is happening in the United States. Because, whether we like it or not, in a very real sense, as goes the United States, so goes the rest of the world. That is of very strong interest to us, and you'll find a number of commentaries that I've made with respect to that. All right, before I get to the main concern that I have today, I'd just like to remind you that we are in summer, and the summer months have are already proving to be very, very, heated, hot. The temperatures are rising. Even in June, we've gotten temperatures all the way beyond almost 100 in some places. And so the bottom line is that we have to do everything within our power to protect ourselves. And, if you have children or, little ones that you're guardians over, to see to it that they are protected. And one of the ways I have been advocating that we do observe that kind of protection during this time is to really keep ourselves hydrated, drink water. I'm not going to say a lot of water, but drink that which you know is adequate to keep your body hydrated. The human body is over 70% or 70% and over water, and we need water in so many ways. And when the time is hot, we tend to sweat a lot, and so we get dehydrated. But that's one thing. The second thing that I would really advise us to be aware of is to wear a cap or a hat when you're in the sun. If you're working out in the garden, put on your cap or your hat. If you're driving to the supermarket and you have to walk towards the supermarket, just wear a hat. If you're out shopping, if you're walking in the sun, any at all, just put on a hat or a cap. What does this do? It takes the direct rays of the sun off your face. And there are some people who are allergic to the rays of the sun, and they break out into all kinds of different spots. I tend to have that problem. So I'm never without a cap when I'm out there. It has become so much a part of my uh, my dress that I just put it on instinctively. But certainly in the summer, I'm not out there without my cap so that the rays can be absorbed and they do not hit my face directly. So I would say just a word of wisdom to those who would really want to heed that word. It really does make a difference. It doesn't matter if you're not used to wearing a cap. You're not wearing a cap to look good in the summer. You're wearing a cap or a hat to protect yourself from the direct rays of the sun hitting your face. All right. So having said that, what's on my mind today? I would like to coach it in the context of a topic. Can Magaism survive President Trump? It is a question that I have heard not fully, not that great deal talked about. But you hear it in some commentaries, whether it is direct or it's kind of tangential to some other matter that is being discussed. But it is something that I've given some thought to, and wonder whether what we are seeing as Magaism, and of course it comes from the word, from the acronym MAGA, Make America Great Again. And though there are a lot of things within that acronym and that, that one could have a lot of problems with, make America great again, as if America was not already great, or to cast some kind of suspicion about the direction of the country in terms of greatness, or what really is greatness. What really is making America great? And do we make America great because we can put ourselves in a dominant position in the world to give people in the rest of the world that we are the number one power, what they call that superpower? Are we making America great again because of the values that have built this country, that have sustained it, and that are the democratic values, and that are largely under threat today? Is that what we mean by making America great? That we can hold on to these values, sustain these values in terms of especially our relationship with the rest of the world, what has been in the past, the way in which what they call American soft power, diplomacy, helping in distressed areas of the world, being able to mobilize the kind of help that is necessary sometimes when natural disasters strike in different parts of the world. Uh, is that what it is all about? Or is it about building a very strong and powerful military that frightens people and gives them the impression that America is great? Or is it just building a country of wealth, however it is built, whether through crypto, or as I prefer to call it, corrupto, or some other uh, means in which we can project the country as being the wealthiest, being rich, taking other people's resources and enriching ourselves at the expense of others, certainly enriching ourselves at the expense of helping people in very critical areas of their lives, even within this country itself. So you see, you're going to see greatness being defined by different people in terms of what their particular agenda is. And that's how I'm beginning to read it, that people have certain agendas and they push these agendas. And certainly the GOP, the Republicans, whose party Trump is in charge of now, see themselves in a different way and a different light. And those who subscribe to the philosophy of Magaism see the country in a completely different light than, say, for example, the Democrats, on the other hand. And certainly the independents who tend to stand in between or stand, away from both political parties, but have nonetheless a very powerful viewpoint about what the country ought to be about and should be doing. So there are many thoughts, a lot of thinking that goes into what this Magaism is all about. But insofar, well, let me put it this way. One has to give President Trump a lot of credit for he started this thinking. And I would say it was a thinking when he introduced it as a political philosophy when he ran in his first term. The Magaism, as it developed and evolved in the first term, started to take on a certain amount of currency to the extent that people gravitated to it and gathered around it and identified with it. Not that it was well understood, because I don't even think that Trump himself understood what MAGA was all about. But it became fashionable and people latched onto it, and he saw it as a conduit through which he could win political power. And as it turned out, he did win power. In the second iteration of Trump now, we see Magaism in a more defined way. And part of that definition came before he even got elected to office. It came under the rubric of the Project 2025, which enumerated a number of ways in which the philosophy that they started off with could become more entrenched in the American political psyche. So it is a stronger, it is it is not a mere thinking now, but what has happened, it is morphing into what you could call a movement that people are subscribing to. And so the question that I ask, can Magaism survive Trump, is whether this movement that has developed, and it is now a movement, whether it can survive without Trump's presence. And as I was saying, you have to give him a lot of credit for, as it were, causing this movement to come into being and to give it traction, especially in the second term. And we will see how it plays out. But now people see something that is identifiable around which they can relate. And many are relating to it. You saw it in the elections, and it's very difficult sometimes. It's a new thing for sure, but it is very difficult sometimes to really understand the full contours of what this movement is all about. As I said, the very ones who have put it into being, they themselves are in a learning curve with regard to what it can be for the country in the present time, and certainly what it could be uh, in the future. But you have to give him credit for evolving this kind of movement. All right, so can this movement survive Trump? I say a few things here. And the first thing that I will say is factual, truthful. Not that everything I've been saying before haven't been factual and truthful, but I want to emphasize this because when you hear what I'm gonna say, people may think that I wish the president ill will, and nothing could be further from the truth. I don't wish any human being ill will. It is not in my DNA to wish anyone, any person, ill will. I may have a lot of problems with your policy. I may have a lot of problem with your persona as you present yourself. Because if you present yourself as being very arrogant or very dominating, I have a lot of problems with you. But when it comes to the person himself and your incapacities that cause you to behave that way, I can have a lot of sympathy for you. Because I think that you can really probably move in a different direction and do better. All right, but so I'm going to say this. At 79, remember it was 79 when he had that venal parade, military parade, which cluttered into failure. At 79, let's give him that he can live to 90. That by my Sunday school arithmetic is 11 years. He could live beyond 90. But as a good book reminds us, if the allotment is 70 and 10, and if by reason of strength you make 80, it is one of sorrow. when the inevitable consequences of aging and the debilitation of body and mind set in. You have to deal with that. So what I'm talking to you about is factual. So let's give the gentleman 11 years. And of that 11 years, how many of those years are going to represent any kind of vitality in body and mind? So at best, he may have a good functional 5 more years. And remember that he's supposed to be leaving office uh, in the next 3 years. There's a lot of speculation that he might not. And his behavior in the past has indicated that if he felt that if he's well, physically and mentally, and it is obvious that he can hang on, he may want to hang on. He has sometimes thrown little barbs out there about a third term, or say that he's not even going for a third term. But why even mention the word third term if it is not something that is percolating in your mind? But anyway, but let's say he gets that 11 years. Of that, 5 years of real functionality. So the point I'm making, friends, is that he's here just for a short time in his physical presence with us. And even if you give him 100, that was 21 years, roughly. And not to mention about from 90 going up, how you're feeling and all that sort of thing. I mean, Trump is not God. There are people who want to make him out to be that in the folly of their minds. So you can really say that if you have 11 more years of living, of which 5 or 6 are functional, meaning that you're able to get about think wisely, think rightly, and a lot of people have a lot of problem with whether that is happening even now, and your physical state is such. For all intents and purposes, you're terminal. You're on the way out. You're sitting in the exit lounge. And I can say that as an elder. Too. You're not much younger than Trump. Not very much younger, frankly. But I recognize that, when you get to a certain age, you begin to move towards the exit lounge. And as I say, you end up meeting each other in the pharmacy and then the cemetery. So I'm just talking about something that is really practical here. So I don't know between now and the end of this term, 3 more years, the extent to which he'll be able to imprint Magaism on the American society for it to have any long-term sustainability, just from the standpoint of physical and mental acuity and strength. So that's the first point I make. The second one is that, given what I have said before, if for any reason that there is a demise because of physical and mental incompetence, let's say that happens, who do you see in the Republican Party who is man enough or woman enough to assume the mantle of Magaism? Tell me, who do you see? Because you see, the way that Magaism as a movement has evolved is that it has evolved around one person. And Trump's way of doing things, his way of thinking, is so, for lack of a better word, abnormal, meaning not so much relating to the normative thinking of people in power. He is a person all by himself in terms of the things that he says and does. And I can't see anybody else in the Republican Party who has enough temerity to come to the American people and to behave and to say as Trump has behaved, or to say the things that he has said and that he has been able to get away with. There are pretenders, but that's all that they are. There are some of those who out there that just jump out there and think that they can say certain things or do certain things, but they are very poor imitators of who Trump is. They are pretenders to the throne because there is nobody in the Republican Party, as far as I see it, I might be wrong, but as far as I'm looking at it, there is nobody in the Republican Party who can out Trump. None. He is in a league of his own. And that is one of the very strong reasons why I believe that when he moves from the scene, for the reasons that I said in the first section, when he moves from the scene, I can't see anybody coming inside there to sustain a movement that has been such a great pain to the American people, especially in the first 100 days of Trump's presidency. Because what you find is that a lot of people have come to detest what has taken place in those first 100 days. I cannot think of any good effect that you're going to have from the kind of draconian immigration policies that have been embarked upon. Arresting people, the kind of callous indifference and callous brutality that is meted out to people, slamming them down on the road, just catching them and, breaking up families. That is not what most people in the world think of as American. And while all of that thing is done under Magaism, and it may hold some traction within the Republican Party and among the many sycophants in that party who bend the knee to what Trump is doing, it is not going to hold muster with the vast majority of the people of this country who know better and think better. That's not going to survive. And it is already beginning to, outside of causing personal pain to families, it is now already beginning to hurt the economy because you're rounding up and sending away people who you need to work in your farms, on your farms, in the hospitality industry, in the hotels, and in so many other areas where foreign workers come and work and Americans are not prepared to work. So even there, you are beginning to feel it in this whole draconian immigration approach by the administration. But we saw it also in DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, so-called efficiency, because what we saw was an inefficient invasion of these agencies of government and sacking people left, right, and center, important people who were doing important jobs and who had experience about the jobs that they were doing, who were just let off and willy-nilly fired because of a subscription to a certain philosophy coming out of this MAGA doctrine. You think people like that? A lot of people are suffering silently who lost their jobs, whose families were disturbed and upended when parents lost their jobs. A lot of the social safety net programs that people depended on and that they see now being whittled away. As a matter of fact, in this so-called big, beautiful bill that is making its way through the Congress right now, if that bill should pass in the way that they want it to pass, a lot of people, including MAGAists, in deep rural areas in America will lose their jobs. And not only their jobs, but will lose their medical care because Medicaid is one of those programs that is being attacked and being gutted in order to get money to give this big tax heist, as I call it, to the richest people in this country. How can that survive for the future? How can that? And then there are things that are just forced in people's face. Take the parade, the military parade, for example, the very military itself, you could see that they didn't even want to be out there. It was a very poor show, wanting to imitate what King Kim Jong Un does in North Korea, or Xi Jinping does in China, or Vladimir Putin does in Russia, trying to imitate that. It was such a poor imitation, and it brought a kind of disgrace to the military. And the military personnel, they're not going to be out there and tell you that. But I think the way in which they were marching and the lethargic way in which they marched could tell you that their heart was not into what was taking place, because what was happening was so contrary to the norm. They were being used as stooges to prop up an idea. And so what I'm saying, friends, is that when you look at all of these things happening under the whole idea of Doge, of Magaism, they're happening because, one man, one person who still has this kind of, sense that he is the absolute ruler over the kingdom that he surveys. This is what the march about no kings was all about, to send a message that many people are detesting that kind of approach. So when you see all of these things happening, I can't see that they can survive. And that is why I said Magaism really does not have any future outside of Trump. And Trump is not deep enough to see perhaps ways in which he can get it more entrenched, because you cannot entrench these kinds of the kind of thinking that goes with Magaism, as I just outlined some of them, in the minds of the American people for it to have any permanent traction. I really do not believe that. Well, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but we'll see. But I cannot see anyone replacing him who can be, as he has been, the kind of magnetic force that pulls these things together and make them happen. And so we will see what happens. But let me just leave this with you on this point, that there's nobody inside there now who can out-Trump Trump. So there are those pretenders, Vance and all the others, who think that they can get away with what Trump has gotten away with. They have something else coming. But I just want to close off by saying something about the Supreme Court, because, the Supreme Court has, in a way, aided and abetted MAGAism in a way that is very dangerous, I think, to the peace of this country. In the past few days, what we see happening, let me just go back a little earlier, because as I had said, that one of the things that Trump would abuse in the second iteration of him as president is the power to enact these executive orders. That is his priority, and he knew that he can just come with those orders and nobody could really stand in his way. He pushed aside the Congress, and whatever he can do, he did. And he can always do anything through an executive order. If ants crawl through the beautiful office, Oval Office, he can write an executive order against the ant. That's how ridiculous it can become. So when he kept doing these things and he had to be blocked in the courts, then, he felt that his policies were being obstructed and he didn't think that, the lower courts, for example, should be standing in his way if he's the president. And so some of these cases have ended up before the Supreme Court. And some rulings that have come from them in recent times are causes for concern. And they're causes for concern because they embolden the worst impulses within this president. First, they gave him the opportunity to do a lot of these things before he got into office because, once he did it within the context of his official duties, and as everybody knows, what cannot be construed as his official duty. And so some of these rulings, and I sometimes really wonder to myself whether the members of the Supreme Court, especially the six that Republicans, and it is very sad, that you have a Supreme Court of 9 justices, and you have, as a citizen or as a person looking on, you have to be defining partisan elements within the Supreme Court. It is a downright shame that people cannot look at the Supreme Court and say that they are above politics, that they are not partisan, that the rulings that they make, you can line up behind those rulings because they do not favor one party over against the other. But in the present iteration again of the Supreme Court that we have, it has become so divided down the middle between the political parties. And especially now that the Republicans have 6 members of the Supreme Court as opposed to 3 by the Democrats. The Democrats don't stand a chance with legislation unless they can pull off 2 from the Republican side. And the very sad thing is the extent to which these members of the Republican members of the Supreme Court, I have to say Republicans, not only that they were appointed by Republican presidents, but they have shown a tendency, and more than a tendency, to support causes that are of a Republican origin and nature over against what you would call judicial common sense. And that's where we are right now. Because some rulings in recent time, take the birthright citizenship thing, for example. If that thing came before it's a constitutional matter, I wouldn't even consider it. I wouldn't even consider it because the president has no right to unilaterally change any constitutional provision. Any constitutional provision was put there because a process was engaged. And that process to put in any clause within the Constitution just doesn't happen overnight. It's one of the hardest things to happen. You'd easily pull an old jalopy up the hill and get it on top of the Himalayas before you can get an amendment to the Constitution passed. 2/3 of either house in the Congress, 2/3 of the states. It's not easy, especially in a divided situation as we have it here in the country. And so when you have a constitutional matter like the birthright citizenship thing coming before you, your best thing is to really look at it in a very serious way and say, no, I cannot aid and abet this kind of change or any change one way or the other. It's not before us. But not only that, but there are other rulings that have given Trump the impression that, boy, he's really free to do a lot of things and to skirt the boundaries of the law. He's been very careful to stay within, and sometimes he has stepped so far over that some people reason that he has broken the law. But if there's one thing that he's careful about is to stay within the narrow boundaries of the law. He may skirt to the very edges of it. But he knows that if there's anything to cause him future pain, it is breaking these laws or overstepping his boundaries too far. And that is why he has been very reticent in staying within the boundaries. But the more emboldened he becomes, the more leverage that the Supreme Court gives him, it's the more he thinks that he can step outside those boundaries. And so, what amazes me, frankly, is the extent to which these people are not thinking. Are they not seeing what so many of us are seeing? The autocratic tendencies, the threat to the democracy, the shambolic governance that we're seeing, the ways in which people are being treated. Are they not seeing that we are creating a kind of society that is going to be in very serious disharmony in the future by them aiding and abetting some of these worst impulses that we see around us? And friends, sometimes I wonder if presidents like FDR, Roosevelt, or any other president of temperate mind, would they have been given the kind of leverage that Trump is given today? I don't think so, because they ruled at a time when the Supreme Court at least had some respect. They ruled at a time when people could have confidence in the rulings coming from the judicial bench of the Supreme Court. And look who they're giving this kind of leverage to, the kind of mentality, the Magaism that they're giving this kind of leverage to. And so you have to be very concerned that the court itself is treading on very serious grounds that could cause problems down the road. They need to be more temperate, more objective, more concerned about the future of the country than narrow partisan interests. No, that is why the Supreme Court is so low in the estimate of the American people. And there is need for some serious reform of that court, because it exercises so much power over people, and yet the justices on there are allowed to stay for life. For life doing what? Some of them who are there right now should have been retired in the people's interest. But yet they continue. And so I see an alliance between Magaism and the actions of the Supreme Court, which are very disturbing. And one needs to be very, very careful that we do not go down the rabbit hole of the kind of disharmony. Let me just put it just that. I was going to use a more stronger word, but I'll leave that for now. But the disharmony that can continue to erode good social relationships in this country, and may in the end spell a kind of doom that none of us wants. All right, I think I've said enough on the subject, and for today, I mean, there are so many other things that one can say, but I'll leave it at that. And I'd just like to thank you for joining me under the mango tree. The mango tree is producing some really nice mangoes. They just pick this nice one, and enjoying them. But so it is. Just like to again thank you for joining me, and just ask you to, when you go to the channel, you know what to do. Just give me a like, yeah, and subscribe. That's the most important thing. Just like in real estate, you have location, location, location. YouTube and some of these other media is subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. All right, so let me hear from you, and in whatever you do, in thought or deed, I just like to encourage you to walk good. All right, so until next time. Bye bye for now.